When the adopted son came back home, he never expected to see his father on the neighbor's porch, bowl in hand, asking for food. Ethan Carter, a self-made billionaire that folks all over admired, stood frozen. He couldn't believe the man who had sacrificed everything for him was now trembling in front of strangers, hoping for scraps. His father, Robert Carter, once skipped his own meals just so his boy could eat. Ethan remembered the nights Robert went hungry, the days he sold off their belongings to pay for school. In that moment, Ethan's polished image and his fortune didn't mean a thing, because the man who built him up was standing there, empty-handed. The old man leaned against a weathered fence, breathing shallow under the late afternoon sun. His shirt had been washed so many times it had faded to a tired gray. With careful steps, Robert carried a small enamel bowl against his chest and knocked softly on the neighbor's door. The smell of cooking drifted out, oil and onions in the air. Robert lowered his eyes and spoke in a low, almost apologetic tone. "If you've got a little left, just a spoon or two." The neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, sighed, disappeared inside, and returned with a ladle of stew. Robert's hands shook as he accepted it, nodding in thanks, his words caught in his throat. Across the street, two men lingered behind a hedge, whispering. "That's Carter again," one muttered. "Ain't his boy rich now?" "Real rich. Never around, though." "Figures." Just then, a black sedan eased onto the block. Its glossy paint and dark glass stood out against the cracked sidewalks. The engine fell quiet, and out stepped a man in a sharp jacket, pausing like he'd walked into an old memory. Ethan Carter, the face people knew from magazine covers and business conferences, stayed still for a long second. Cold air spilled from the car as he shut the door gently. His thumb tapped against his palm while he steadied his breath. Then he walked forward. Robert hadn't noticed him yet. He was busy thanking Mrs. Anderson, tilting the bowl to keep from spilling. He tried to straighten himself, wincing, then shifted his stance. The sun deepened the lines around his eyes. At the edge of the fence, Ethan stopped. He noticed the split shoes, the neatly pressed cuffs, the trembling hands. Something inside him went quiet. The men behind the hedge leaned in. "That's him," one whispered. "The watch on his wrist could buy this whole street." Mrs. Anderson spotted Ethan first. Her chin lifted, cautious but respectful. "You looking for someone, sir?" Ethan licked his lips, unable to speak at first. He only nodded, eyes fixed on Robert. Slowly, he stepped closer, his jaw unclenching, shoulders loosening, hands opening and closing like they hadn't in years. Robert finally turned. He blinked at the silhouette, at the stance he'd recognize anywhere. Nervously, he shifted the bowl to his left hand and wiped the other against his pant leg, an old habit. Ethan's eyes flicked to the stew cooling in the breeze. A small shake of his head, half disbelief, half regret. He exhaled, and a single word slipped out. "Dad." "Mrs. Anderson cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Carter, you best take that inside before it gets cold." She was giving him away to keep his dignity. Robert nodded gratefully, then glanced at Ethan with a hesitant, polite smile. "Afternoon." From the hedge, one of the men whispered, "Man, if that were my father." One of the men behind the hedge whispered tightly, "Leave them alone." The other muttered back, "At least let the old man stand first." Ethan didn't rush. He wasn't there to show off his money or put on a scene. He simply reached for the latch on the fence. The metal gave with a tired click. Gravel shifted beneath his shoes as he walked the short stretch, every step feeling like a crossing of years. Careful. Steady. Earned. He didn't try to take the bowl, and he didn't make any promises. Not yet. He stopped just an arm's length away, shoulders squared, eyes bright with emotion he couldn't hide. The breeze lifted the hem of Robert's faded shirt, cooled the stew by a degree, carried with it the scent of soap, sweat, and road dust. Somewhere nearby, a radio buzzed with a game score, while a dog barked weakly behind a fence. Ethan dipped his chin once, an unspoken apology. Robert nodded back, as though saying they'd talk when the street wasn't listening. And the street, curious as ever, pretended to look away while catching every detail. The silence between father and son stretched. Instead of filling it with words, Ethan simply followed when Robert turned toward the house, cradling the chipped enamel bowl close. Ethan's shoes echoed against the worn floorboards inside, wood that hadn't been polished in years. The air smelled faintly of soap and starch, clean, but thin. Curtains, hand-stitched long ago, hung with frayed edges. The kind you only replace when they no longer hold back the sun. Ethan glanced around. The same old mug sat on the table. The same squeaky fan circled the room, just like when he was a boy. Memories rose in him, ones he'd buried under success, and they came back sharper than ever. Robert set the stew on the table with care, almost reverently, as if it were a full feast. He bowed his head and whispered a prayer of thanks, not for Ethan, not even for the neighbor who'd given it, but simply for the chance to eat. Ethan's throat tightened as he watched. His father was giving thanks for scraps. The memories pulled him back. He was small again, wearing school shoes that pinched but were brand new, carrying books he never imagined owning. He saw Robert bent over a sewing machine at midnight, glasses slipping down his nose, calloused fingers steady on the fabric. No complaints. No bitterness. Just sacrifice humming steady through the night. He remembered waking to the sound of his father coughing, slipping into the kitchen to see a half-eaten plate pushed aside. Robert whispered to himself, "He needs it more than I do." Ethan went to school with a full stomach, while his father survived on bread and water. There were colder memories too, the day Robert sold the family's only cow, the one that had kept them fed for years, just to cover Ethan's exam fees. The neighbors had murmured then as well. "Why pour so much into a boy that isn't even your blood? You'll regret it." Robert never snapped back. He only pulled his belt tighter and kept working. Now Ethan sat at that same kitchen table, running his palm across the scarred surface. Knife marks. Oil stains. Each one a reminder of meals stretched thin, of sacrifices stacked on top of each other. Through the open window, voices carried from the fence outside, neighbors who hadn't walked away fast enough. Robert could have had a better life if he hadn't poured everything into that kid, one said. And look at the boy now. Rich as can be, but he never comes home. He'll show up when there's a camera, just like always. Ethan froze, their words cutting deep. His jaw tightened. He wanted to stand and argue, but what would that prove? They were right. He had stayed away. He had always promised to come home after the next deal, after the next quarter. Years slipped past. And with those years, his father's strength had slipped too. Then Robert broke the silence, not with anger, but with a small chuckle. "You remember that blue blazer you wanted for graduation?" he asked, stirring the stew absent-mindedly. "Didn't fit in the shoulders, but you stood taller than any of those boys. Thought you were flying." Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered more than the blazer. He remembered the hollow in his father's cheeks beneath that proud smile, the hunger hidden behind it. He hadn't asked then. He hadn't wanted to know. But now, watching Robert dip bread into thin broth like it was gold, Ethan couldn't look away. The weight of it pressed down hard. The weight of Robert's sacrifices pressed against Ethan's chest, mingling with the guilt of his own long absence. The distance between them wasn't just years, it was a gulf that no amount of boardrooms, speeches, or billion-dollar contracts could erase. Sitting in front of him was the man who had gone hungry so that Ethan never had to. That truth started burning in him. Ethan sat with his elbows on the old kitchen table, palms pressed together, staring at the floor as if it might swallow him whole. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy, the kind that makes you hear your heartbeat in your ears. Robert lifted a spoonful of stew, blew across it, and took a slow sip. His hands trembled slightly, but his expression carried the same calm as always. He caught Ethan's eyes and gave a small smile, the same one he'd worn when Ethan came home as a boy with scraped knees or a failed grade. That smile always said, "It'll be fine. We'll find a way." But it wasn't fine. Not anymore. Ethan leaned back and dragged a hand down his face. His eyes stung before he even realized the tears had gathered. His chest felt tight, and finally, his voice cracked through. "I left you here," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "I left you hungry." Robert gave a quiet chuckle and tapped his spoon against the bowl. "Son, don't do that to yourself. You were building something. That's what I wanted for you." Ethan slapped his palm against the table, not in anger, but in frustration at himself. The sound echoed through the little house, loud enough for the neighbors to notice. Their murmurs floated back through the walls. "Did you hear that? He's arguing with the old man now." "No, listen closer. That ain't anger, that's guilt. That's a son finally realizing what he's missed." Ethan's voice broke through their whispers. "You gave me everything, Dad. You starved yourself so I could eat. You worked yourself ragged so I could walk into rooms I never deserved. And when you needed somebody just to sit with you, where was I?" His shoulders shook. The billionaire mask, the confident posture, the polish, gone. What sat at that table was a son, undone in front of the one man who'd always seen through him. Tears fell, darkening the wood grain. Robert reached across the table. His fingers were rough, nails short, his touch weak but steady. "Ethan, listen to me. I didn't do all that so you'd sit here crying. I did it because love doesn't need thanks. It just gives." Ethan bent forward, his forehead nearly resting on his father's knuckles, breathing unsteady. He could smell the faint soap on Robert's skin mixed with the earthy scent of labor, a smell that once clung to his own clothes as a boy. And now, he wanted it to never fade. Outside, Mrs. Anderson hushed the men at the hedge, though even she couldn't resist leaning to whisper to the woman beside her. "Look at him, rich as the world, and he's still just that boy in Robert Carter's shadow." The woman answered softly, "Sometimes it takes a lifetime to see who really raised you." Ethan sat up, wiping at his face roughly, though the tears wouldn't stop. His voice came raw. "I don't care about the empire, the headlines, the contracts. None of it means anything if the man who made me has to beg on a neighbor's porch." Robert's eyes softened. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The truth was already etched in the wrinkles of his face and the scars on his hands. Ethan drew a shaky breath, pushed back from the table, and stood. His voice steadied, carrying loud enough for the fence, the street, maybe the whole town. "No more scraps. No more quiet suffering. Dad, you're coming home with me. And I swear," his throat caught, but he forced the words out, "I will never let you stand on anyone's porch begging again." The murmurs outside went still. Not even the gossipers had words left. What they were seeing wasn't gossip anymore. It was something else, something too human to mock. Ethan bent down, kissed his father's hand, his lips trembling against rough skin. The gesture was awkward, desperate, but full of love. For a moment he stayed there, breathing deep, as if all the wealth and success he had ever gathered could somehow be poured back into the man who once gave him everything. And for the first time in years, Robert let his son carry the weight. Ethan rose in that dim kitchen, wiped the tears from his face, and helped his father up from the chair. The bowl of stew, once so precious, sat forgotten on the table. Robert started to protest, but Ethan steadied his arm with a grip that was firm yet gentle. "No more words," Ethan whispered. "This isn't charity. This is family." Outside, the neighbors straightened as the door opened wide. Sunlight spilled across the porch, illuminating a sight that felt almost sacred, a billionaire carrying a frail old man as if he were the most valuable thing in the world. One neighbor muttered, "Never thought I'd see him carry anyone but himself." Another shook her head softly. That's not just carrying. That's paying back. Ethan led Robert to the waiting car. The chauffeur moved to assist, but Ethan waved him off. He opened the door himself, guiding his father inside, then crouched so their eyes met. "You'll live with me now," Ethan said, steady as stone. "No more scraping, no more loneliness. You'll eat at my table, in my home. And everyone I meet will know the name Robert Carter, because you're the reason I'm alive." Robert's lips trembled, his eyes glistening. He didn't look proud or relieved, only peaceful, as though a burden he'd carried for decades had finally slipped away. That night, the mansion on the hill glowed bright. For the first time, Robert sat at a grand dining table, not as a guest, not as a beggar, but as family, with his son at his side. The staff moved with respect, not pity. Silverware sparkled, plates were full, yet Robert still bowed his head and whispered grace like always. Ethan didn't touch his food right away. He just watched his father eat real meals again, watched him smile without effort, and felt years of guilt loosening their grip on his heart. Later, at a charity gala, Ethan stood before cameras and powerful men and told the truth. With his arm around Robert, he said, "This man taught me what wealth really means. He fed me when he had nothing. He clothed me when he went without. If you see me as a billionaire, know this, I'm only standing in the shadow of his sacrifice." The room fell silent, shaken. And in that silence, Robert lifted his chin, his dignity restored. The story didn't end with pity, it ended with balance. The father who once begged for scraps now walked marble halls, not as a dependent, but as a man honored by the son he had raised. And Ethan, stripped of his masks, finally understood. Fortune meant nothing if he forgot the one man who had built his future on empty stomachs and sleepless nights. In the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't money or houses, it was love, it was sacrifice. Sometimes it takes seeing the one who raised you bow low before strangers to realize how high they should have been lifted all along.